I don't know, T, what do you say? Showtime? Yeah? Let's do this thing. Cool. Okay, everybody. Welcome. Today is our 6th episode of Moxie Live. They said it couldn't be done, that no one would come out, that we weren't funny enough, that I had a face for radio. But here we are, going strong in our 6th week. I'm super excited today to be joined by 4 designers whose tenure and accolades speak for themselves. While Moxie Live up to now has been a vehicle for a few laughs and very much a how it's made type show, today we're shifting gears and turning it over to our 4 panelists to discuss one of their projects and the design decisions that went into it. We're going to have some fun along the way, and it's worth staying tuned until the end for when we open it up for discussion. Whether you're a new student and have just started your dip into lighting or you've been working in lighting your whole career, there's always something new to learn in our industry. And while many of us work in different sectors of lighting outside of design, be it a manufacturer, a rep, a supplier, or an installer, at the heart of it all is lighting design and that community's desire to push for better. With every show, before we get into the heart of it, I'm going to turn it over to Moxie's own, Elaine, the last millennial cook, for a brief state of the stuff.
Hi, everyone. So this week, I want to change it up a little bit and share some kind of cute news stories. So I'm going to share my screen. So this is Tony, Newton, and Marie. They are 70-year-olds that are living in the UK. They have, during this quarantine, they have really used their time to create a beautiful garden. They have over 3,000 plants in a quarter of an acre of yard. So this is their yard compared to all of their neighbors. And so, oops, trying to flick to the next. They have over 450 azaleas, 120 Japanese maples, and 15 blue star junipers. They used to spend on average 2 hours a day before quarantine in their garden, but they're now spending anywhere between 8 and 9 hours in their garden and have expanded it to what you're seeing before you. There is a before, so this is what their backyard used to look like, and you can kind of see how much it has changed over the past couple of years that they've lived in this space. So I thought I'd just share some cute and happy news to hopefully brighten someone's day. And that's it. I'm going to pass it back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Elaine. That was a nice surprise. As always, real quick, if you have any questions, you can drop them into the Q&A. I'll be monitoring that throughout the show. You can always raise your hand. And it's possible maybe towards the end we might do some polling for some fun. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first guest, Francesca. Francesca is the co-founder and principal of Site Studio, a Brooklyn-based architectural lighting design practice, and a part-time faculty at Parsons in the lighting program. She's the current president of the DLFNY. Originally from Venezuela, Francesca received her BA in theater and psychology from Smith College, a master's in psychology from Lesley University in Boston, and an MFA in lighting design from Parsons, the New School for Design. Francesca's thesis earned a Richard Kelly Grant, and she has been twice named one of Lighting Magazine's 40 under 40. She is the U.S. Ambassador for Women in Lighting. And without further ado, Francesca, you are up. You're also on mute. There we go, cool.
There's people yelling outside, so I just thought I would save you from that for right now. Hello, my name is Francesca, as introduced. Matt, thank you so much. Elaine, that was a dream. Like, that is my dream. There's a show on Netflix now that I'm plugging that called Small Spaces, Big Dreams, and it is pure joy. If anybody needs something calming during this time, highly recommend that. So I'm going to share my screen to talk to you all about a project that recently completed. And I can't hear any of you, so it's like the void, but you guys can hear me, right?
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, we can be your peanut gallery if needed.
Great. So I wanted to share this project because it's one that recently completed in 2020, and so something recent and joyful that we were able to finish up and do a final site visit at the beginning of the year. And it's an artist residency in Knoxville, Tennessee, and it's one of those projects that we wanted to showcase because it looks great, but it was also a great collaboration with the design team and wonderful clients. And those things happen in our work, but sometimes they're rare, or sometimes there's bumps along the way. And this was really a pleasure. It was a client, the Aslan Foundation, that really supports creating public spaces around the Knoxville area, and is in part trying to have this connected loop of parks around the hills that surround downtown. And here we see this new building on a logging campus. I'll give you the next image, which is the overall campus. And you see here, there's log cabins from when this area was being logged. This was the housing for the people who were working, and has now become this artist residency where artists stay in those cabins, but the foundation needed a place where everybody could come together, both its studio space, gallery space, staff office. And one of the only requirements to be part of this residency is you have to have a communal meal every week. And so it wanted to have a residential living and dining space and a place to come together. But because this area is also very sort of rural and dark, the client, who often favored aesthetic over function, also wanted, they said basically everybody can wear a headlamp or have a flashlight. We don't need to put lighting on the campus, which is fine. But we also wanted to have visual connections. And so, trying to find your way to this communal building in the middle of the night or when it gets dark meant that one of the goals was to create a beacon, sort of a lantern in the landscape, both for people who come in from the public to see the building, and then also from people who are in residency to come and join you or come together. So this is the larger context of the campus, and then our scope, which was the interior exterior of the main gateway building, parking, entry, the landscape that surrounds it, and trying to connect those elements. And one of the concepts that we'd put forward with the lighting that should occur across the campus was sort of these breadcrumbs, these visual connections or nodes to get back to this main building. So here we see the smaller scale of that close to the building, and a view from one of the walking paths as you're sort of in this presentation image that we had shown early on, what you might see of this building, being able to see views inside the building. There's large glazing as well as the end gables, which is like the primary view that you saw through the trees. So this is a view from one of our presentations. And then a photo that I took at our last site visit in January, early February. So to see that worked, then you get that sense of this glowing gable as you're walking towards it. And then some of the other details, wanting to work, the client, as I said, was more aesthetic over function. So trying to integrate lighting without having sort of bollards or step lights. Applied, we worked with the architects to develop a step light formed out of the same metal and materials that the gates were made out of, and integrate it with the stone so that it'll patina at the same rate, it'll look natural, it'll sort of blend into the environment. And it was just connectors to be able to orient you. And going inside, this is an earlier image, so some of this was developed clearly, but in this image isn't shown. So we had 3 parts of the building. You enter, there's a gallery and exhibition space, offices for the staff, the working exhibition or studio space, and the other side, which is the residential coming together communal space. And so the building is open to the public sometimes, but for the most part, it's really the place where the residents can come in and have meals together and have late night talks. And so this is that interior feel where during the day you have these beautiful expansive views out into just like wooded areas and like peeking through to other hills in Knoxville. And you can sort of picture being able to be here at night and having it be dark and come sort of gather around the fireplace, wanting there to be a warm interior, but also then allow, there's lighting integrated above all the windows that spills out so that you have a view beyond. It doesn't just become this black mirror at night. And going back to the more public space, sort of places where they have exhibitions or an artist in residence, this is the front corner of the building, what you see when you're getting out of the parking lot, something that during the day will rotate with whatever artist is being showcased, but that corner is also lit at night as sort of the glowing public presence. And just finishing up with one of the images of night, sort of showing some of those elements that were integrated into the building, lighting, washing on the front walls, lighting integrated into above the glazing, trying to maintain some of that transparency in the evening, obviously the control shifting so that changes both while we know that people will be there for dinner, but then post dinner, this stays on for a while and as a beacon, but at a lower level before going out. And I think that's it. I rushed through it, I think. But
This is awesome. I want to go here.
it's beautiful. I want to go there.
Are you up for talking briefly about as you talked about, you're dealing with a place that's very remote.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you live in an environment that is the counter opposite in terms of volume of light. How do you, even with calculations, maybe between mock-ups and stuff, decide on what is like the right intensity level to start at with a lot of that product?
A lot of it was, I mean, we do the same process that we would on a project, but we had the good fortune with these clients that they supported mock-ups. They'd had a full-scale exterior mock-up where we did the glazing condition and the exterior lighting on a portion of the building, and were able to then also have dimmable fixtures. We did choose some fixtures that had lower output to begin with, so that we knew we didn't need that much light, especially when it's the primary sort of light source in this area. But we're able to adjust it through controls and commissioning at the end.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you went to site to do that yourself then?
Yeah. So
Cool.
we were able to go 3 times throughout the project. And had
Cool.
very responsive clients who worked with us and took photos, and it was a great experience.
We do have a question from actually an interior designer in the city. Gail asked, how does a Brooklyn-based lighting expert get pulled into a project in Knoxville?
Because we're fortunate enough that some of the people that we work with end up moving away, and then our connections, our network elsewhere.
Cool.
For all the students, maintain your network.
If you think you have questions later or something comes to mind, don't be afraid to drop it into the Q&A later. But Francesca, thank you so much. Very, very cool. Oh,
yeah.
Just a comment from anonymous attendee. That project was amazing. It's not my dad. He's not at his desk.
That was Alex Pappas.
Very cool. Francesca, thank you. We will see you later for other parts of the show. But for now, I'm going to kick it over to Nelson with, well, I'll do a brief intro first. Sorry, Nelson. Nelson is an award-winning lighting designer whose consultancy practice, involvement in the professional community, and passion for teaching inspires creative work in the ever-evolving field of lighting design. Since founding Lumen Architecture in 2005 is a comprehensive lighting design consultancy, He's worked on a variety of prestigious projects throughout the world. The vast diversity of these projects have enabled him to hone his expertise in the poetic use of light, for which he and his consultancy have won several awards for design excellence. He complements his professional experience with teaching at Parsons the New School and also lectures internationally. His work has been featured in numerous magazine and trade publications, where he is regularly cited as an authority on a range of lighting-related topics. He obtained degrees in architecture and fine arts from Rhode Island School of Design, and he lives in New York City. And while it's probably funny to get that whole intro, it really is important that you guys hear it, because obviously a lot of time and energy and work has gone in from Nelson to get to there. So without further ado, Nelson, take it away.
Oh, thank you very much. Let me just share my screen if you allow me. Let's see if that works. All right. So thank you very much, Matt, for asking me to be on this panel, and Francesca and the other people. One of the things I wanted to discuss was the kind of fun of working on projects internationally, but also ones that are local and have like a historical reference point to myself. I was also going to say that one of the more frustrating things on working on projects is when a project gets canceled before it actually gets finished. And one of those projects was a project where I was looking at lighting an office space where we wanted to use a product that was designed by one of the professors that I work with, Derek Porter, which was just a very thin fixture that would stretch across an office space and then uplight a vaulted ceiling. It was a project that was in Chelsea, and we were looking at using this fixture to uplight the vaults. And in the 11th hour, after all the fixtures had been specified and almost purchased, the client pulled the plug on the project, and it was never realized. And so that was 7 years ago. We ran all the calcs, made sure everything would work. It was just funny when I was looking back at the project, it was like Lumen Micro, which was a predecessor to AGI that we used to use. And there was this new project that we were approached to light. They were going to change this space, which was the old Tech Serve on 23rd Street. And this is what it used to look like. You can see on the side, they had all these old antique electrical parts, and also had these cast iron columns that ran through the space, and these vaulted ceilings that reminded me of this project 7 years ago that I had never been able to realize. And so I looked at that and I was like, oh, this would be an opportunity to use something that I've seen before. So this was kind of the model of the space that we received from the architect. The architect on the project was LTL Architects, and they kind of saw this space as divided into two halves, one side being the side with the gallery and the other side being the more open and the less contained. So one side was going to be ended up being for the poster museum. So the right side of the building where I'm showing here was going to hold the galleries. That was a humidity and temperature controlled environment. And then the doors and everything on the other side was going to be open, less contained. It was going to include have a cafe, a gathering space, a retail store, all under one roof. So this is the exterior of the museum, and this was the interior of it after it got changed from the old Tech Serve. So again, like on the left-hand side, you see the retail component of it, and then just beyond is the cafe area. On the right, you kind of see these columns that we wanted to retain through the space. You can see again on this left-hand side, we wanted to emphasize this duality of the two parts of the space where we had this uplight component, which again was this fixture that just has LED tape uplighting the vaults, and that run all the way through and provide this very ambient luminous quality. And on the right-hand side were these adjustable accent lights that can adjust and target and aim and have a much quieter look in the space. So this is taking a different angle, kind of showing the bifurcation of the different areas, and it was accentuated both in the ceiling, but also on the floor plane, also on the wall plane. And so looking at how the lighting can enforce the architecture was something that we're always trying to express. So it ended up being like there's a scissoring mechanism right in the middle that changes the two areas. This was the interior of the gallery space, again, like temperature and climate controlled. And I started off my career years ago back with Glenn, who worked for a lighting designer and architect who did primarily galleries and museums. So it was nice to get back to the roots of that. And one of the things that we also integrated into the project was a virtual reality space. So thinking about museums in this day and age is not just for the experience of seeing art, but is also as an educational tool and a way of understanding how the reach of the museum can extend far beyond the physical boundaries of the museum itself. I'd also say that most of the times when I'm working on a project, by the time it's done, I hate talking about the project because I'm so finished with it. I just want to get it out and never want to visit it again. But luckily, like I had a teammate, Natalie Lesniak, who was also involved with the project, which actually she carried a lot of the weight and the burden of carrying this through to fruition, and allowed me to enjoy the project a lot more after it was completed. So with that, I'll take any questions or show.
Awesome, thank you. Francesca, it wasn't Alex, she said, and Billy also said that she really enjoyed that. Nelson, I have a quick question. Was the product you used on this for the vaulted ceiling the same product from 7 years ago, or did you find someone else to make something based on that previous design or concept?
It was more or less the same product. We actually just used multiple manufacturers to produce the effect. So it was a different tape light than it was the fixture that actually held the tape light.
Gotcha.
So, yep. And obviously there have been a lot of advances and fine tuning of tape light that historically used to be pretty bad, but now is pretty utilized light source in a lot of different architectural environments.
Someone asked whether or not they can buy the "We Can Do It" poster.
Yeah, we're having a barn sale discount. You can get it for free, but you can also go to the museum and take the picture with yourself in it. So.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
I have one other question maybe I actually thought about, which was, you mentioned how you kind of started in gallery spaces and museums, and obviously you've done a range of applications. I think sometimes it seems kind of evident, whether it's theater or lighting that involves setting contrast in spaces, that extends into maybe applications where you wouldn't think of that. But are there, and this might be putting you on the spot, are there projects that you've been given where you've like learned something new that you wouldn't have thought you would have through that project to apply to a different application?
Well, I think that's one of the things about a lot of the projects that we're working on now is that these environments that historically, like a museum, were only about showing art, and now they realize that in order to stay in business, they also have to have a cafe component. They have to have a retail component. They have to have a space that can function for fundraisers. So like all these different elements are being combined together in a way that historically was never necessary, so that the diversity of projects that we work on actually can culminate into a project like this, which is we don't do the most museum projects, you know, in the world or city, but we do a lot of these different types of projects that can all be garnered together to produce a project like this. And the same is true of libraries. Like libraries used to be just to hold books, and now libraries have retail space, and they have cafes and all kinds of different different prototypes for the type of things that are going on in those different spaces. So the projects are much more diverse than they used to be. A long-winded answer to what you were asking.
No, it was trying to, in some ways, maybe hit on or pull out the point that even if something is simple in a simple application, there's a good chance that you're going to have to pull from that into something else in the future.
Yeah, and
yeah.
even, you know, offices aren't like
Yep.
the typical office anymore. They want to be more residential and more cafe-like, and so like the line that delineates one kind of project from another is getting blurred all the time. So.
Very cool. Nelson, thank you so much. Guys, that marks the midway point. We're going to stop and take a brief pause here to just thank our sponsors. Yes, so this week's sponsors are Coleman Flashlights, now with interchangeable optics, so you can have lighting design at your fingertips. And Got Lamp, advocating for filament lamp design since 1932. We really like to thank these guys for supporting the show this week. That takes us into our next section, which is actually a group section, where we're going to learn a little bit about everybody on the show. And I'm going to kick this over to Elaine to run. So Elaine.
Unmute. There we go. So very hard question coming to you guys. What pet would you be and why? So let's kick it to Glenn first.
Well, you know, given the current situation, I guess it seems like I would be a pet that is not really meant to be inside, because that's the way I'm feeling at the moment. So I guess I would be like a cheetah or something like that. Something that's got this great potential to run, but is on a leash.
Very cool. You get to pick the next person. Who do you want to go after you?
I think I'll use Natalie's next.
Kind of boring, but I want to, again, thinking of the current situation, I want to be a dog so that I can go outside. I do get to get walks, so that would be mine. And I get to pick who goes?
Yep.
Francesca's showing us something, so you're muted.
This dog smells. So I would actually, I think the life of a dog right now is quite wonderful, but I had in my head the image of being a hedgehog, one that's like really protected, kind of stay away from me, but like comes out and unfurls if you put something like that smells delicious in front of it. So that's where I am right now. Little hedgehog, kind of cute, but in a cocoon.
Love it. I guess Nelson, you're next. What do you want to be? Oh, I think you're on mute. There you go.
I always wanted to have a pet monkey, and but my Indian spirit animal, I would say, is a sea otter for some reason. I've always loved watching otters and thought they have the life.
They do. They're pretty cool. They can defend against a crocodile or an alligator. I can never remember which one, but they're pretty feisty. Cool. That ends this section of the mid-break show. So I'm going to pass it back to Matt to chat about one more question. Sorry, I lied. It's not the end.
Wait, but do you guys get to answer as well?
Oh, I did not prepare a pet, so I'm going to dodge this and pass it to Matt so I have time to think about it.
You're a salesperson. You got to be able to think on your feet, Elaine. Come on. I didn't prepare one either, but you know what? I think in the current environment, and because believe it or not, I had these growing up. Their names were, well, I'm not going to go into their names, but I just might be a rat in the current situation because I feel like I'd have free reign of the subway. I'd be able to eat pizza out in the open. Nobody would be bothering me. There's not a lot of trains right now to run me over. In fact, I've been seeing them wander a little bit more out to the street. So I feel like their reign's going to come to an end soon again in New York, and they're going to have to go back into the shadows. But right now, wouldn't be a bad place to be. So
You totally stole mine. I was like, okay. The second pet that I would rather be is actually my dogs. My dogs have a pretty amazing life. They're not mine, they're my parents' dogs, and we call them the better siblings because my parents, we feel like they love them a bit more than they love us. So they can go on the couch, they get to eat all types of food. So if I was a pet, I would really like to be my parents' dogs.
So, thanks, Elaine. Next up on the docket was we were going to ask each of you the weirdest thing that's happened to you in lighting. But I am looking at the time of the show, and we do like to keep it within a certain curtail. And I think the primary thing that we want to cover, frankly, is projects and lighting design. So I think after we get to hear from Glenn and Natalie, we'll see where the time is like, and we have that. We'll bring you guys back in. But Elaine, I'm going to kick it over to you to introduce Glenn, and we'll go from there. Cool?
Perfect. Okay, so spanning the fields of design and practice, Glenn's work with oh my god, sorry, my computer is frozen. With light places him at the center of converging professional disciplines. Originally trained as an architect, Glenn received a Master's of Fine Arts in Studio Art with an emphasis on light space installations and light art history from Maryland Institute College of Art in 2008. In addition to his professional activity as principal and founder of Flux Studios, Glenn is an assistant professor of light design and former director in the Master of Fine Arts Lighting Design program at Parsons School of Design in New York City. His activity in international lighting design community includes a position as the U.S. Coordinator of Professional Lighting Design Association from 2009 to 2011, and he was invited to do lectures in Turkey, Spain, France, Colombia, Mexico, Italy, Sweden, Denmark, Canada, and throughout the U.S. Some current Flux Studio projects include the National Aquarium, Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, National Gallery of Art, National Cryptological Museum, and Light Art Commissions. So I'm going to pass it to Glenn to showcase one of his favorite projects. Glenn?
Thanks, Elaine. Also, Glenn makes a pretty good ski turn, just so everybody knows.
Well, that I really need to thank you for. Thanks, Matt and Elaine, for putting this together, and to my fellow panelists. I feel the need to reference a little Parsons Proud call out here that all the panelists have strong connections to Parsons Lighting program. So before I show a project, I did want to return back to this conversation about what something I saw at a project site. Here's a cheetah on a leash. So when you work on zoos and aquariums, you get to see these crazy things. So this was something that I thought, it's going to work for both of the questions Moxie hits us with.
Awesome.
But you get to see some other crazy things. So here's a gorilla that's doing some stretching in the morning. Saw that recently. And then if anybody's getting bored, hang in there, starfish. I know this Moxie presentation has taken us a little while, but wanted to make sure to keep everybody going. So the project that I want to show you guys today is a project that's more on the light art side of our practice. It's called Radiant Echo. And it's also a project that I have meant to be giving a full presentation at Education about the project that has a lot more information than what I'm going to be showing today. So I understand I'm going to be doing that remotely at some point. So there'll be an opportunity for anybody that's interested to learn more about the project then. So Radiant Echo was the result of a call for proposals. So we competed with some other artists for an artwork that was required to be located in an atrium of the science building in a small liberal arts college. And the brief required the work to evoke fireworks. It was dedicated to a couple of professors and one former president of the college that held a lot of patents for fireworks and pyrotechnics. And so we were asked to do something that would be evocative of fireworks. And our approach to the project was to really abstract the experience of viewing fireworks, but then also to introduce a component of education into the artwork, specifically to allow it to be used as an educational tool by the faculty of the school. I'll show you more about that. Just to give you a little bit of a context of how the idea evolved over time, 2015 was when there was a call for proposals. These were the concept renderings that we included in our proposal. So we really tried to capture the quality of the artwork without knowing a lot of the details. One of the primary features is that you view this artwork from multiple locations. So there are 2 bridges that cross this atrium space. There's a study area at the floor of the atrium, other study areas up on upper floors that you get these sort of frame views into the height of the atrium. And then there's also this view from a distance from the exterior areas on campus, but also that face out into the community. So we developed an approach that included 2 different types of hanging strands. One of the strand types is not electrified, it's just hanging reflector strands. And the purpose of those was to reflect the LED pixels that were changing, but also to give the artwork a interest during the day so that it would really be activated in the solar lighting conditions. The atrium gets eastern and southern light. So there are times when it's really, really interesting in how it's activated by the daylight condition that was already there. We also developed a custom LED strand. So it's essentially a circuit board that's hung from these channels at the top that has bare LED RGB pixels along the way, and then culminates in another reflector that provides the weight to hold it in place. So here you can see the assembly. So there are 5 planes. 3 of them are only reflector strands, and the 2 central planes are LED pixel strands, 2-sided pixel strands. And the dialogue between these 2 strands is something that we were really interested in from the beginning. Here you get a sense of the different character that they have, but also how they relate to one another. The reflectors being these static in their position, but variable in how they reflect the light. And then the pixel strands are of course, quite dynamic. So our intent from the beginning was to have to create an experience of the sculpture that would be immersive, site-specific, but also consider both the day and night lighting conditions. We wanted something that was really dramatic after dark, but we didn't want it to be something that looked like it was unintentional during the day, because most of the time the school community is going to experience it during the day. So here are some photos of the daytime condition when some of the direct light hits these reflectors. And what you get really is the same kind of a quality that you get from the pixel strands when the reflector strands reflect the sun. And it's specific to certain times of day and times of the year, which I also think is an interesting kind of way to keep the artwork interesting and different as people experience it over time. So we developed 2 different we have had from the beginning of this idea of 2 different ways the pixel strands would operate. One way that we call the resting state is the sort of typical condition where we want the artwork to be really quiet visually, so it's not really too distracting. And then, but we wanted that to be punctuated by a series of active state shows that would kind of draw your attention away from whatever you're doing for a short period of time and maybe give you a different perspective. It's a science building, so this is not in the middle of the art school. It's in the middle of a school that has people that maybe will not experience art or go actively kind of pursue experiencing art. So the active states are about introducing them to the potential for art to change their perspective. So we developed 5 active states and then this one resting state. And I wanted to just quickly touch on the way that we put this together from a software perspective. So we developed we worked with a programmer that was doing the commissioning to come up with a mapped Photoshop file. So we made all of our video files using Photoshop, and we mapped where the reflectors are on this Photoshop file. So this is actually the Photoshop image that becomes the trickle flash resting state. So this pattern is the result of this image, which was an abstraction of fireworks in the first place. But then, as you can see, we started to sort of hack it to get the output the way we wanted it to be. And I'm only going to touch on a couple of the shows. So one of the shows is called Active State. And I'd mentioned that there's an interest in the artwork telling a story and educating. So this one is about the system that conventional fireworks operate on. So there's a charge that causes the firework to lift off of the ground. And then another, hold on a second, I'm gonna get these going while I'm talking. So you're gonna see the way the Photoshop file operates and then have the masked view of how we did it. So what we were showing here is abstraction of how the fireworks operate at a chemical kind of level. So you have a blasting charge that raises it off of the ground, and then a second charge and then there's an explosion, and then there's a second charge that raises it up higher and a second explosion. So the physics and chemistry faculty could use this to describe that phenomena. We also use the colors of the raw chemistry that creates fireworks, of which there are only 7 different salts that create color in fireworks. So we limited our colors only to those 7. So there are these layers of meaning that are not required to find interest in the work, but there's a way to sort of further engage in the work over time. And the last one I want to talk about is one that we did some research early on about the way that fireworks operate at a molecular level, and discovered that what happens at a molecular level in fireworks is very similar to what happens when a star forms and then implodes and becomes a black hole. More light discussion for the Moxie live presentation. Let me just go full screen on this. So we call this one supernova. And so it's an abstraction of a star forming out of a cloud state of kind of soup in the cosmos. And the cloud, the star starts to form and become a shape. And then it becomes this finite shape that it holds on a little while and then bursts. And then over a period of time becomes a black hole and disappears. So one of the shows has this kind of description of that relationship between what happens at molecular level that you never think about, but is what is going on in fireworks too. So that's what I've got.
Glenn, that was super cool. We have a few questions. I'm just going to jump in here. I think the first one was, is he Joe Exotic? No, just the second cousin. That was back to your lion.
Right. If only.
Elizabeth asked whether or not this system was used at Guinness in Dublin, Ireland. I think that probably poses an interesting secondary question, which is obviously there's a lot of lighting in the world. And maybe at the appearance, there are similar concepts, but obviously it sounds like something that you built kind of from the ground up conceptually. So I'm assuming it's kind of one of a kind.
Well, all the programming is one of a kind, and these pixel strands were developed for our project too. I mean, there are a lot of programmable pixel mapping products that are out there, and what we did use an existing pixel mapping server to create so that video content could be translated into this large-scale, low-resolution video screen. But all the content was completely custom. The positioning of the pixels, the sort of pitch of the pixels, was intentional as well. We were really interested in what we could do with a low resolution screen so that it would remain abstract. And a lot of pixel grid installations are really about creating legible video, sort of high resolution video.
We had someone else ask whether or not, what was the reflector strand made out of?
So we used stainless steel cable, braided stainless steel cable, and then we sourced spheres that we ended up going with aluminum instead of stainless steel because of cost and because of weight. Aluminum was heavy enough, so they were polished raw aluminum spheres. So yeah, or they are, I should say.
Cool.
And then we use solid balls at the base of all the reflector strands to give it more weight.
I'm going to ask this next question, but real quick, and I think across all three projects, which I always think is something that maybe to the lay person, and not that we have a lot of lay people on the show, but how much work you guys do that isn't just lighting specific. So integration architect, I mean, across all three projects, you see that. So there's the lighting concept itself, but then there's these questions about weight and how it actually fits into the aesthetic, whether it's a wall or this installation and those things that you have to think about.
Yeah, well, this installation, there was no architect, so we were the lead in every way on the project. So we were managing the project. We managed the bidding and the quoting of the fabricators and the base building contractors. We hired engineers to structural engineer and electrical engineer to support our work, and we designed all the components, working with a fabricator that had to do mock-ups so that we could validate those decisions. But yeah, in this case, it is an example of how a lot of lighting design firms have a capacity to work beyond just specifying the lighting. And so in this case, we certainly did.
And that kind of answers, I think one of the other questions we had was whether or not your proposal included the collaboration with the programmer for this, or if it was somebody that you brought on after you had kind of secured the scope of the work.
Well, we worked with a company in the early stage of the RFP just to do a pricing analysis. So we had to submit some preliminary pricing in that initial proposal, and then that same company ended up through a competitive process winning the bid 3 years later. But they were sort of supporting our vision in terms of the programming for sure. So it was a great collaboration. But they had all the skills for how to get the system to work, and we were really generating the content.
We have one last question, and then I'm going to kick it back over to Elaine to introduce Natalie, which was there any collaboration with the actual faculty?
There was. We did a workshop with faculty and students from 10 different departments around the school that we organized. And this is something that's relatively new in our practice, but that's something that we've been doing more of, which is co-design with the users or those people that are going to be living with the artwork afterwards. So that workshop was really informative at giving us some intent for some of the programming that we didn't have before, and understanding some of the concerns that they had so that we weren't sort of making mistakes about putting something in their environment they didn't like.
Do they have any ability now to add programming at their own discretion?
You can imagine this one came up in that workshop, and every time any student has ever seen it, how do I get a hold of that? Yeah. So yeah, this was a really big issue that we had to work through, including copywriting the artwork in really specific ways. Yeah. Because in the conversation that we had with the school was, if there's a commissioned painting on the wall of this atrium, yeah, and it would never occur to them to say, can the students have some paint and just kind of tweak it? So the answer is no, except what we offered, which I hope they do. The installation just happened, I should say, in the fall of 2019. So it hasn't even been up for a year yet. But what we would be interested in would be leading workshops with the students to create alternate shows that could get added to the sequence, so that it would really represent a combined vision. But we don't have any interest. There was the suggestion of having George Washington's head on the screen because the college is in honor of George Washington. So that gives you a sense of what would happen if we give them the keys to the car.
Cool. Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.
Awesome, back to me. So next we have Nathalie. Nathalie is a senior associate at CBB, which she joined in 2000 after receiving her MA in architectural lighting design from Parsons New School for Design. She contributed to CBB's projects in the hospitality, educational, commercial, and residential fields. Nathalie's diverse artistic background includes design experience in architecture, interior design, and furniture design. Outside of her professional scope, she is an amateur photographer, and she's also an instructor for the architectural lighting design course at the New York School of Interior Design. So Nathalie, I welcome you to show us one of your projects.
Hi, Glenn, I have a tough act to follow now. Thank you, Elaine and Matt and Francesca and everybody else. So I will share my screen. Oops. So this is the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. It is a project that we did with Robert M. Stern, and it was completed about 2 years ago. So this is the exterior, obviously, or the facade of the building. One theme that was very prominent with the building was the star of the American flag. And actually here, the photo to the left is a photo of the original flag. And as you can see, the stars were not a pointed star. They had these rounded shape. And it was actually a shape that the whole design team and the museum board wanted to keep or to integrate into the design. And actually this particular star was also it's part of the logo for the museum. So as you enter into the main lobby, you can see that there is this lay light where that star pattern is integrated. And in this case, to supplement with the lay light, we had to use some downlights. So we chose to do 13 downlights to represent the 13 stars. We just have some cove, and we needed some lighting also for that desk where we just had a fixture that was bracket mounted off of the soffit. So leading you more further into the museum, this is starting to get to the stair hall. All the galleries are actually on the second floor of the museum. So this is that stair hall where, again, you can see now that we are integrating another star pattern. In this case, it's just an escutcheon that is attached to a standard downlight. And I'm gonna go back here where we basically did some mock-ups. We were asked to do this flatted star. We did a mock-up. It just didn't look right. It looked to us more like a sea star than a real star. So we ended up going with this more three-dimensional pointed star. And in this case, we could not use 13 stars because the fixtures would be too far apart, so we went to 26. So then now going to the second floor, you get to this grand hall, which is a double height space, which has a skylight at the center. The skylight was very large. It was about 20 feet wide by 40 feet long. And here, as you can see, we are really accenting all the architecture from those columns to the vaulted ceiling with the cove. And then there are some accent lights and downlights that are illuminating this large piece of art, the floor and down the stairs. So this piece of art was actually the most valuable painting that the museum had, and it needed to be preserved. And the challenge that happened was with the skylight, which here you can look at, which is actually the light, the natural light is coming from a light monitor. And the project originally had to have some electric shades. Well, those were V'd out and we went to some manual shades. Needless to say, the shades were not moved often because where they are, you had to get on a catwalk, and there was way too much light on this piece of art. We were getting, on a cloudy day, it was getting like 100-foot candles, which is really not what you're supposed to get. So that became a whole exercise with the museum, to the point that they basically decided to close the shades at all time. And even with that, we were getting more light than was ever required. And then at night, the skylight is illuminated also from floodlights that are up into that, above on that catwalk. And the main feature of this museum is Washington's tent, which, full disclosure, we did not illuminate. That was part of the exhibit design, lighting design, which we did not do. But I figured I'd share it with you because it was really I think, probably the most important, or the attraction for people to get to the museum. So the way this works, because again, the fabric is so old and needs to be preserved, the tent is illuminated every hour for about 20 seconds. So when you go into that theater, there's a presentation, there's a projection, and then at the end of the projection, they illuminate the tent for a few seconds and turn it off. Just as what Nelson was saying, talking about his museum project, in this room was specifically an event room, because again, the museum is trying to attract a crowd where they can raise more funds by renting out the space. So this is really an event space, where in this case was set up for a wedding. And there are some downlights which are not visible, and if not, we just chose to accentuate the architecture. So now going to the exterior of the building at night, you can see that really the choices were really to accentuate the architecture, illuminate the various signs. But here to the right is an excerpt of the Declaration of Independence, which also needed to be illuminated. So that one we did with a framing projector, which we had to attach to a street pole. And as you guys know, as lighting designers, adding anything to a street pole and starting to deal with DOT becomes a little bit of a battle as to who's doing what, who's maintaining the fixture, and all that. So in this case, luckily, DOT was okay that they let the museum do it, and the agreement was that the museum had to maintain the fixture, that they obviously were not responsible for it. Also, illuminating these stars above that vestibule were a little bit of a challenge as to where we could place the fixtures so that they would not be visible. We ended up doing an architectural cavity within the roof, and we were able to place a fixture in there that was used as an uplight. And then here on the north facade of the building, there were these bas-reliefs, which we only saw actually physically when they were installed. So it was a little bit of a lighting from blind here. They were made in China. We had seen some very small sketches of them, and luckily that worked out, but it was really with some engraved uplights and some wall wash. And there's another one on the other side of that other vestibule, which is not visible in this picture. And finally, this is a picture of the building at night. Unfortunately, it's not a professional picture. As you can see, everything is a little bit overexposed, but it really gives you a sense of the illumination. This plaza was something that was very dear to the museum. They wanted it to be illuminated because they also wanted locals to gather there at night, even after the museum was closed. And then in this picture, you do see that the skylight is illuminated because that light monitor is just extremely bright, which means that that skylight has light. And that's it.
Nathalie, thank you. Very cool. We'll open it up to questions while we're doing that. It was pretty cool. I want to personally also thank everybody before maybe we take a little time here, because I think we have a few minutes to get into some of our fun questions. But I think in some ways totally unplanned, we got 4 very different projects, but all of which in their different applications show how much intent in some ways goes into some of these small details and working with different customers. So the fact that you're thinking about using 13 downlights to mimic that probably will make me that much more likely to be staring up at ceilings when I go into places now and counting and being like, I wonder. But you're working with not just artificial light, but daylight. And then you mentioned things like the DOT. So from Francesca talking about community and behavior and how light was being thought about for that, to Nelson, who shared how an old project came back to life in some ways and a concept 7 years later to be applied as part of a multi-use space and some of that background. Glenn, obviously, we got to hear about an art installation and the different details that are thought out throughout that process. And Nathalie, both interior, exterior, thinking about daylight, all that type of stuff. I mean, it was a really, honestly, very cool, wide range of things to get to see. So seriously, thank you all for doing that. Yeah, I mean, everybody's still on. So if you guys are up to it, I say we kick this over to Q&A / the panel. Elaine, why don't we start with this? Nathalie, since you're on, do you want to share with everybody either the weirdest or toughest or funniest thing that's happened to you in lighting?
Toughest is sometimes I find that it's not really yes, you have some challenges, the detail is challenging, but somehow I find that we always resolve that. I think the toughest is really dealing with everybody else that's on the project, all the roadblocks that you get from your project is over budget, or you're told to do this design and then, oh, sorry, yeah, you're over budget, you need to VE, or from the contractor kind of dictating what product you have to use or not use. So to me, those I think are tougher challenges than the design itself, because I find that in the end, the design, we're always going to resolve it. Yes, it's hard, but we'll come to something that will work.
That seems cool. I would agree with that. As somebody that's on maybe one of those channels that creates headaches. Nelson, you're up.
I want to just reiterate what Nathalie said. The technical problems and the details, those are why we do it. It's the games and the challenges in the marketplace that are so important to whether or not a project turns out, but that are the biggest challenges for me.
Do you find, Glenn, Nathalie, is you've worked on more and more projects that you've found better ways to work through that? Or do you feel like you're maybe in the same place you were 5, 10, 15 years ago with a lot of that?
I'm not. I think when I started, I took all these things so personally. Like I felt like there was a problem with me, and but now it's just, okay, it's a problem. We're going to resolve it. Yes, sometimes you get really, really aggravated, but I think I've learned to not make it about me or thinking that I did something wrong, because I know that I always give my best. So I don't know. That's my take on this.
My take is that I feel like the greed in the marketplace is very much like a mutating virus. As soon as I figure out a way to work around it, there seems to be a shift in the approach. Just this week, I got I'm dealing with an issue that it was a system that had worked before, and now somebody's playing with the specs in ways I've not ever anticipated. So maybe, I don't know. So I'm getting better, but the rules are changing.
I was having a long conversation with somebody else, not on the panel, about this last week, and it might be something that we bring up in a future week to talk about with maybe a few other people from the industry. And what is still the same from what I experienced 11 years ago, since I've been doing it for 11 years and still to this day, and maybe some of the new challenges, like you said, that have arisen, or creative ways that that channel has continued to find ways to maybe break down, etc. Nelson, I'm gonna kick it over to you. Something funny, tough.
Well, one of the things that is always difficult is that we spend a lot of time behind our desk, and then all of a sudden we get to go to the job site, and you have to move around heavy ladders and scaffolding, and become very engaged with the installation. And one of the most engaging situations I ever had was working at the National Archives, where we had to crawl above the rotunda, and in order to get to some of the light fixtures, we had to crawl on our stomachs in order to get to the fixtures. And there was one fixture that we had to crawl into in order to get to it. And once I got into the space, I couldn't figure out how to get out of it. And I became like claustrophobic. And finally I was like, well, obviously if I got in here, I can get out. And then one of my colleagues crawled into the space, and I was like, well, when you get in there, just remember how you got in there, because it won't look like you can get out. And sure enough, he couldn't figure out how to get out of it. So that was one of the more humorous
I can appreciate that. I've been
experiences.
on a few catwalks, and I don't like heights, and so it's like, just remember, they're like, they want to replace 500 of these light fixtures, so I kind of go into it, my eyes closed, and I grip the railing and do it all for lighting.
Yeah, repairs and access is an important aspect of a project's longevity.
Yeah. Francesca.
I'm trying to, like, drawing a blank right now, even though I thought about this ahead of time. But what Nelson mentions in terms of like what you find when you go, I mean, all three of you, it's not necessarily the technical, the design, it's how it gets executed. And I think that part of it, when you show up on a job site for a punch list and you're like, I don't know where that came from. That's an old drawing that we never saw that. They're like, yeah, this is the same thing we built off of something that you issued 3 revisions ago. And it's then the process, even on the project that we shared, like, that wasn't the detail, but how do we work? They built the chimney and then forgot that they were going to clad it afterwards, and so the dimensions changed. And you're like, okay, well, I'm on site, I'm going to figure it out.
Yep.
Somebody's up on a ladder with their butt crack hanging out and like trying to rotate fixtures, but it gets resolved for the most part. And I think that's when you have a good collaboration, it does get resolved. But it also just reminds me, and I think I was speaking with students earlier this week, it's all communication, and it's different forms of communication. It's the verbal, the written, the graphic communication, making sure that those things are consistent and clear so that somebody else can understand it. So
very cool. Thanks. I think the last thing we were going to do is actually, I'll kick it over to Elaine, because she had one last question. And I think in this instance, we still have pretty much everybody on. So as long as our panelists are cool with another 5 or 10 minutes, we'll open up this discussion. And maybe if you want to chime in, raise your hand. And as the dictator in the situation, I will decide whether or not I allow you to talk. Elaine.
Sorry, my mom just walked in with the dogs. Yeah, so my question kind of goes around what we're experiencing right now, which is the COVID-19 crisis. And I wanted to see if you guys had any thoughts on how the design world is going to change in response to the COVID-19 and the virus, and where you think we're going to go in this direction. So if you have any thoughts. This is all very like out in the open. I'm not going to track you down in 6 to 8 months and say you were wrong. You chose blue and it's actually green. So all of this is open.
I can
Go ahead.
jump in. Like I think that this could just be all speculation because we don't know what's going on. But one of the things that we've been thinking about recently is we've been talking a lot in our sort of research and our projects about density and growing density within cities. And now sort of the need to be separate and to move away about whether the work that will resume or start is going to be about moving away from cities. You know, for us, does that mean that the parts of the city that are being rezoned have like another chance to revisit because of the way that we want to develop how close we are to each other? But that's sort of like speculation on sort of an urban level, not necessarily specifically about lighting design.
Yeah, the question was supposed to be out in the open and kind of wherever you thought kind of us as a world would get to go. Does anyone else want to chime in?
We're gonna follow a lot the architects or interior designers lead, but to a little bit to what Francesca's thinking more grand scale, but me, I'm thinking just like thinking an office environment, or actually all of us on this panel teach. How does the classroom change? You know, how many students, how do we get closer? Like in my office, the studio is literally one person sitting next to the other. How do you keep that 6 feet distance? So I'm thinking more, it may be more design changes and then lighting will have to follow, except that, I don't know if any of you attended this blue light or UVG seminar yesterday where lighting may be used for other things than just lighting, as in light is used for sanitary reasons. So I don't know, but I think it's all out in the open, because to me it seems like we don't even have a grasp on the disease itself.
Do you guys think maybe based on your tenure, and I know there isn't necessarily anything like this, I feel like in the last 10 years that have potentially impacted behavior and change in space, but do you think that this potentially opens up a conversation for you as lighting designers with architects and interior people as they start to look at new spaces to maybe bring the lighting back to the front of the conversation about how it can shape behavior? So if possibly we start to look at how we want behavior to be differently in spaces, there's the physical aspect, but clearly just from the 4 projects that you each went through, the design intent has a lot to do with how you want people, right, to behave and feel in that space. I don't know if you have thoughts on that or you thought about that, but I'll throw that out there.
Well, I think design is become more holistic, and so that it's no longer just an isolated element, like the building technologies and BIM, and everybody is working in a much more collaborative way, and there's much more overlap between what historically were separate disciplines, and now the technology has allowed it to be more inclusive, in addition to people working from remote locations. People were traveling more. I mean, I know Glenn works in a virtual office scenario, and now we're all following in his footsteps, where previously I was thinking that, setting up the office so that I could work remotely when I was traveling for business. And now like I'm working remotely because out of necessity. So I think that those kind of issues and manners of working are becoming more and more, are going to continue to be more and more the norm, as we continue to try to minimize our carbon footprint. Maybe these are opportunities to travel less and do things remotely that we previously had to do in person. So I think that these kind of strategies and ways of thinking are going to proliferate through everything that we do, and through the design and through the tools that we utilize to get them done.
We have one person raising their hand, a couple questions, and then I think if you guys are cool that this has been fantastic, we'll wrap it up. Elizabeth Glenn asked previously whether and I don't know if you can share this, but what was the overall cost of your installation? And maybe a better question was, did it end up where you thought it would originally?
Well, I'm not prepared to say what the overall cost was. I am prepared to say that we got 2 competitive bids for artwork fabrication, same exact scope. One of them was 4 times as expensive as the other. The one that was less expensive happened in this, I just will chalk up as great luck, but it came in $7,000 less than what we budgeted. So, but the other one came in a lot more than $7,000 more than what we budgeted. So it was the whole thing with the budgeting on that project was interesting because, again, it started in 2015. So what the project would have cost in 2016 is a lot different than what it cost in 2019. But I also won't go into detail of how many hours we spent on the project.
All right. Cool. I'm going to say, I think we can wrap it up with that, guys. I really appreciate everybody coming on. This was a lot of fun. It was different than what we've done, but I think it was super informative. And I think with everything that's been going on with the last 7 weeks, it's awesome to get this many people to come together and see this. I will do one quick plug for next week. Next week, actually, we're going to have Stanley Wilson on the show to talk about circular economy, which I think is interesting. So he will be talking about his manufacturer, but he's going to spend a fair amount of time talking about how he thinks about from the nut, the bolt, the finishes he uses, how a product comes together, and what that means for the end of life for a product. So we are looking forward to doing that. Same time on Friday. These are all recorded. I will share them with you guys so that you have them, but they'll be on our YouTube channel and they will be on the website. So without further ado, unless anybody else has any questions, seriously, thank you guys. That was a great way to go into the weekend and enjoy the cold and the snow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Be well, everyone.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.